So one thing we haven't talked about so far is personal archives. And I know, Sherpa is heavily invested in the data management space, trying to help people. I probably shouldn't say get rid of PSTs altogether, but personally, I'd be very happy if they all vanished. That's not always realistic from a business standpoint, but one of the things that Personal Archives is supposed to do is give you a way to take these PSTs that are scattered all around everywhere and bring them all back to your Exchange server and put them someplace where they can be backed up, where they can be managed, where they can be discovered. How do you think Microsoft did with that as a version 1 feature in Exchange 2010?
Not too bad, actually. They did a really good job. Well, with SP1, I should say, they did a better job because the original version, you couldn't have it on a separate data store. But now you can, which makes life a lot easier. They really did a lot of improvements, even in the discovery side of the house for SP1. A lot of the initial complaints I had about many of the features, they really did a good job resolving them.
Okay, well, good. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Okay. But yeah, no, I think they did a great job. I mean, you do have to be proactive about implementing it, though, right? I mean, if you have your PSTs scattered, we should probably say why PSTs are a challenge. It's mostly because you don't have any control over them. PSTs it's like any other individual file. You can put them anywhere, you can do anything with them. And once again, from a legal point of view, you are liable for them. The information that's there, if you have a retention policy, fantastic, but what if you have information on your PST and you don't have a retention policy that can touch it, you don't have any tools that go after it, you're still liable for that data. And people have them all over willy-nilly, and then they lose them or they try to access them on the network, which is not a very good idea. So there's a lot of challenges with PSTs. And Sherpa Software does have tools that help take those PSTs, put them up into the personal archives, and then you have a one-stop shop. Your retention policy can be there, your litigation hold, everything on one place, which is great. It's fantastic. But you have to be proactive. You have to go out there, you have to get those PSTs, you have to put them in there. It's not going to happen by itself. In addition to that, you have to also think of at what point do you want to have your retention policy? If there's old data in there, are you going to take that up and put that in your stores, or do you want to start with a clean slate and do that, as long as you don't have litigation outstanding, of course.
It's an interesting way to think of it. Most of the time, when I talk to customers about personal archives, they like the idea of being able to say, okay, we're going to give our users large mailboxes, but we're also going to give them some place where they can put this old stuff that they think they need. As IT admins or as the IT department, we have no idea if this stuff has any business value or not. The users say that it does, and we would rather have it in a personal archive than, I was working with a customer a few weeks ago who said that they had an end user who had more than 80,000 items in their deleted items folder. Because when they were done with something in their inbox or in another folder, they would delete it, it would go in deleted items, and if they needed it later, they would go get it back from there. As an Exchange admin, that just makes me want to cry. I mean, that's a complete misuse of what the Exchange store is for. But personal archives do give us a way out of that. That customer could say, okay, Mr. End User, here you have this lovely archive, and it has a 20 gigabyte quota, and you can put all this stuff in it, and we'll back it up, and we'll manage it, and we'll maintain it, and you can search it. You never have to worry about losing anything. Now, would you please stop filing things in deleted items? That seems like a fair trade.
Definitely. And I've seen enormous mailboxes. A lot of for attorneys, for all they should know better.
They're the worst about this, aren't they?
They're the worst. Executives and attorneys, I'll tell you what. And of course, they have the most power, if you will, in the organization. They say, well, I should be exempt from the retention policy. Well, okay, here's your personal archive. You'd be exempt from the retention policy, and we'll deal with that another time. Not necessarily.
No, that's an interesting question. Can you do that? I mean, can you say, okay, we have one tier of policy for our executives, and we have another tier for these people? Is that defensible in court?
Absolutely, if you articulate it.
So if you do, provided you do that in advance, you can't make up your policy ex post facto and say, oh, yeah, our executives had a separate policy.
Yeah, exactly. You really have to. First of all, as an IT person, I might fight back. When you're creating policy, you really should create it with not just your IT people, your business people, but also your legal people as well. They should all be involved with creating the policy. But if it comes down that the executives have a separate retention policy, just make sure it's written down. Make sure that this is how we do it. This is their retention policy, and you have to stick to it. But as long as you have it articulated, that will cover you. It definitely will cover you.
Okay, good. So it sounds like the name of the game, sort of, to this whole process is figuring out what you're going to do, creating a policy, and then doing it, and then verifying that you actually have done it or are doing it.
And keep in mind, some organizations, financial services organizations, for example, have compliance regulations because to make things a little more complicated, if certain SEC regulations say that all brokers need to keep their email for 5 years, I'm not sure those are the exact terms, but they had to keep their email for a significantly long amount of time, they obviously are going to have a completely separate retention policy, archiving system, everything else than the secretary in an organization.
Right, but to avoid scaring people, we should probably point out that if you're in an industry like that, the odds are really good you'll already know it. If
Yes,
you're in
one
financial
hopes that if you
services
don't have that in place already, there's going to be severe challenges.
Right, so there's not a huge risk that you're going to wake up one morning and find out that there's this whole regulatory regime that you should have complied with that you didn't.
Yes, one hopes you
unless you're in Europe, I mean, then
that's a whole other story.
It's a whole completely different story.
Yeah, I mean that's one thing with multinationals. I mean, even if you're a small organization that's doing business with organizations in the EU or other jurisdictions, they have completely different privacy laws than we do. And what we're talking about today very much is based on the United States legal codes and things like that. Canadian legal codes also a little bit different, more towards the American model than the European model, but there are enough differences there. And every jurisdiction is a little bit different. Your state jurisdictions are going to have different, each state has different jurisdictions and different sets of laws for civil procedure. Now, most of them do use the FRCP as a template, but they all have little tweaks. So you really do have to be aware of what it is in your jurisdiction. And of course, New York City is going to have it different than, say, Fargo, North Dakota, or South Dakota, actually. Than the other ones.
Okay, so this goes back to what you were saying earlier about being prepared and sort of knowing the terrain that you're operating in. You need to know what the applicable rules are.